Sarah Martinez had been dead for 15 years according to every government database in the world. The explosion in Kabul on March 15, 2009, had supposedly claimed the life of the CIA's most decorated undercover operative. Her funeral had been a small classified affair attended only by a handful of agency officials who knew her real identity. Her gravestone in Arlington Cemetery bore a false name, and her family had been told she died in a car accident while working for the State Department. But Sarah was very much alive, living in a small fishing village on the coast of Maine, under the name Emma Thompson. She ran a modest bookstore, kept to herself, and had spent the last decade and a half trying to forget the shadows of her former life. The scars on her back from the Kabul bombing served as daily reminders of why she had chosen to disappear rather than return to a world that had nearly killed her. Every morning, she would wake before dawn, make coffee, and sit on her porch watching the lighthouse beam sweep across the dark ocean. The routine had become sacred to her, a meditation that kept the nightmares at bay. She had built a peaceful life, far removed from the violence and betrayal that had defined her years as an intelligence officer. The morning everything changed started like any other. Sarah was arranging new books in her store window when she noticed the black sedan parked across the street. In her old life, she would have immediately cataloged the license plate, noted the position of the occupants, and planned 3 different escape routes. Now, she simply felt a familiar chill run down her spine. She tried to convince herself it was nothing. Tourists sometimes rented expensive cars, and government officials occasionally visited the small coastal towns for legitimate reasons. But when the same sedan appeared again the next day and then the third day, Sarah knew her past had finally caught up with her. On the 4th morning, a woman in her early 30s approached the bookstore. She was petite with auburn hair and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore casual clothes, but Sarah recognized the slight bulge of a concealed weapon and the way she positioned herself to watch both the door and the street. The woman browsed for several minutes before approaching the counter with a book about lighthouse history. As Sarah rang up the purchase, the woman spoke quietly without looking up. "My name is Agent Rebecca Chen, Secret Service. I need to speak with Sarah Martinez." Sarah's hand paused over the cash register keys. After 15 years of being Emma Thompson, hearing her real name spoken aloud felt like a physical blow. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Sarah replied calmly, though her heart was racing. Agent Chen placed a photograph on the counter. It showed Sarah in military fatigues standing next to a Humvee in what looked like Afghanistan. She was younger, her hair longer, but it was unmistakably her. "We know who you are, Ms. Martinez, and we need your help." Sarah looked around her quiet bookstore, at the life she had carefully constructed. Sarah Martinez died in Kabul 15 years ago. There's nothing left of her to help anyone. "That's where you're wrong," Agent Chen said, leaning closer. "The president's daughter is in danger, and you're the only person who can save her. The threat comes from someone you put away a long time ago. Someone who knows you're still alive and is using the president's daughter to draw you out." The lighthouse beam swept across the harbor outside, and Sarah felt the weight of her old life pressing down on her shoulders. She had hoped those days were behind her forever, but she was beginning to realize that some ghosts never truly rest. "Who is it?" she asked quietly, though part of her already suspected the answer. Agent Chen's expression was grim. "Viktor Petrov. He escaped from a Russian prison 6 months ago. Intelligence suggests he's been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment to get his revenge against the woman who destroyed his arms-dealing network." Sarah closed her eyes. Viktor Petrov was a name from her darkest memories, a ruthless criminal who had sworn vengeance against her during his trial. She had been the one to gather the evidence that put him away, and she had been the one who testified against him in a closed courtroom. If he was free and targeting the president's daughter, it meant he had resources, connections, and a very long memory. "The president's daughter is named Jessica," Agent Chen continued. "She's 22, a senior at Georgetown University. 3 days ago, she started receiving anonymous messages containing details about her daily routine that no one outside her security detail should know. Yesterday, someone left a photo of you at her apartment door with a note that said, She can't protect you if she's dead. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had once defined her existence. Despite 15 years of peaceful living, her training kicked in automatically. Her mind began calculating probabilities, analyzing threats, and formulating plans. If Petrov knows I'm alive, then staying hidden won't protect her, Sarah said. He'll keep escalating until he forces me out into the open anyway. That's what we're hoping you'll realize, Agent Chen replied. We need Sarah Martinez, not Emma Thompson. The bookstore owner can't save Jessica, but one of the CIA's best operatives can. Sarah looked out at the harbor where fishing boats were heading out for their morning catch. The peaceful life she had built was about to end, and she knew there would be no coming back this time. Once she stepped back into her old world, Emma Thompson would be the one who truly died. What's the current threat assessment, she asked, and Agent Chen smiled slightly, recognizing that the legendary operative was beginning to emerge from behind the bookstore owner's facade. The transformation had begun, and there would be no turning back. 24 hours later, Sarah found herself in the back of an unmarked government vehicle speeding toward Washington, D.C. She had closed the bookstore indefinitely, leaving a simple note on the door about a family emergency. The elderly woman who ran the neighboring antique shop had promised to keep an eye on the place, though Sarah suspected she might never return to collect the keys. Agent Chen sat beside her, briefing her on Jessica Morrison's daily routine and security protocols. The president's daughter was apparently nothing like her father, preferring books to politics and volunteer work to campaign rallies. She was studying international relations at Georgetown and had insisted on living in a regular apartment rather than accepting the full Secret Service protection that came with being the first family. She's stubborn, Agent Chen explained as they crossed into Virginia. Gets that from both parents. She agreed to limited protection after the threat started, but she refuses to be locked away in the White House. She has finals next week and a job interview with Doctors Without Borders the following Monday. Sarah studied the surveillance photos of Jessica Morrison. The young woman had her father's determined jawline but her mother's gentle eyes. In every photo, she was surrounded by books or helping at a soup kitchen or studying with friends at outdoor cafe tables. She looked like exactly the kind of idealistic young person who would refuse to let fear control her life. Has anyone explained to her that Viktor Petrov once tortured a man's entire family to get information about a rival arms dealer? Sarah asked. We've tried to convey the seriousness of the situation, Agent Chen replied diplomatically. She understands the threat is real, but she also believes that giving in to terrorists only encourages more terrorism. Sarah almost smiled despite the circumstances. The girl had spine, which would either help keep her alive or get her killed, depending on how smart she was about channeling that courage. They arrived at a secure facility in Virginia as the sun was setting. Sarah was escorted to a briefing room where she found herself face-to-face with Director James Sullivan, the man who had officially presided over her funeral 15 years earlier. He looked older, his hair completely gray now, but his eyes, still, held the sharp intelligence that had made him one of the CIA's most effective leaders. Sarah, he said simply, standing to shake her hand. I'm glad you're alive. Are you? She replied. Because keeping me dead has been pretty convenient for everyone involved. Sullivan had the grace to look uncomfortable. The Kabul situation was complicated. We had to make some difficult decisions. Sarah nodded, not interested in relitigating the past. Tell me about Petrov's escape. The next 2 hours were spent reviewing intelligence reports, prison records, and intercepted communications. Viktor Petrov had not simply escaped. He had been systematically planning his revenge for years. He had cultivated relationships with guards, bribed officials, and built a network of contacts on the outside. When he finally made his move, it had been executed with military precision. He has funding from his old arms-dealing contacts, Sullivan explained. Plus, he's been recruiting former military personnel who have grudges against the U.S. government. Our analysis suggests he has at least 12 operatives working with him, possibly more. Sarah studied the photos of Petrov's known associates. Several faces were familiar from her old case files, criminals she had helped put away who were now free and eager for payback. It was like looking at a reunion roster of her worst enemies. What's His endgame, she asked. Killing Jessica Morrison won't bring down the U.S. government. Intelligence suggests this is personal, Agent Chen answered. Petrov's wife died in prison 3 years after his arrest. She had been arrested as an accomplice in his arms dealing operation. According to our sources, Petrov blames you for her death. Sarah felt a familiar weight in her chest. She remembered Petrov's wife, Elena, a quiet woman who had seemed genuinely unaware of her husband's criminal activities. Sarah had argued against charging her, but the prosecutors had been determined to use every available leverage to ensure Petrov's conviction. So this is about making me suffer before he kills me, Sarah concluded. That's our assessment, Sullivan confirmed. He wants you to feel responsible for an innocent person's death, the way he holds you responsible for Elena's. The psychological profile made sense, but it also gave Sarah an advantage. If Petrov was driven by emotion rather than pure strategy, he might make mistakes. The key would be staying one step ahead of his planning while protecting Jessica without getting her killed in the process. I need to meet her, Sarah said. If I'm going to protect her, I need to understand how she thinks, how she moves, what her instincts are in dangerous situations. Sullivan nodded. She's at her apartment now. We can arrange a meeting, but Sarah, she doesn't know about your background. As far as she's concerned, you're just another Secret Service agent assigned to her protection detail. That's probably for the best, Sarah replied. The less she knows about why she's really in danger, the less likely she is to do something heroically stupid. An hour later, Sarah found herself standing outside a modest apartment building near the Georgetown campus. Jessica Morrison lived on the 3rd floor in a 1-bedroom apartment that she shared with a roommate who was currently visiting family in California. The location was defensible but not ideal, with too many windows and multiple access points that would be difficult to secure. Agent Chen knocked on the door and called out, "Jessica, it's Agent Chen. I have someone I'd like you to meet." The door opened to reveal a young woman who looked exactly like her photos, but somehow more vibrant in person. Jessica Morrison had the kind of energy that made a room feel more alive, and Sarah could immediately see why limiting her movements would be like trying to cage a wild bird. "Ms. Morrison," Agent Chen said, "this is Agent Sarah Thompson. She'll be working with your security detail for the next few days." Jessica studied Sarah with intelligent eyes that seemed to take in far more than most people her age would notice. "You're not Secret Service," she said after a moment. Sarah kept her expression neutral. "What makes you say that?" "Secret Service agents have a very specific way of standing and looking around. You're doing something different. You're not just watching for threats, you're cataloging everything as potential weapons or escape routes. That's military or intelligence training." Sarah exchanged a look with Agent Chen. The president's daughter was more observant than anyone had given her credit for. "You're right," Sarah said carefully. "I have a different background than most protection agents, but right now the only thing that matters is keeping you safe." Jessica stepped aside to let them enter the apartment. "And you think I'm really in that much danger?" Sarah looked around the small space, noting the large windows facing the street, the fire escape visible from the bedroom, and the dozens of books scattered everywhere that could provide cover but also concealment for threats. "Yes," she said simply. "I think you're in more danger than you realize." The first attack came at dawn 3 days later. Sarah had been sleeping on Jessica's couch, a decision that had sparked considerable argument from both the Secret Service and Jessica herself. But Sarah's instincts had been correct. She woke to the almost inaudible sound of someone picking the lock on the apartment's back door. In one fluid motion, Sarah rolled off the couch and grabbed the pistol she had kept under the cushion. She moved silently toward Jessica's bedroom, grateful that she had insisted on conducting security drills despite the young woman's protests. "Jessica," she whispered, shaking the sleeping woman's shoulder. "We need to go. Now." Jessica came awake instantly. Another sign of the intelligence that ran in her family. She had been skeptical of Sarah's paranoia, but she had listened to the instructions and prepared a go-bag as requested. The sound of the back door opening confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Petrov's people had found them, and they were moving with professional efficiency. She could hear at least 3 sets of footsteps, which meant they were outnumbered and trapped in an apartment with limited exit options. Sarah pulled Jessica toward the bedroom window that opened onto the fire escape. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being cornered inside the apartment. "Stay behind me and do exactly what I say," Sarah whispered as she carefully opened the window. "If I tell you to run, you run, and don't look back." Jessica nodded, her face pale but determined. Whatever else could be said about the president's daughter, she wasn't a coward. They made it onto the fire escape just as the apartment door burst open. Sarah could hear voices speaking in accented English, confirming that these were Petrov's people. She guided Jessica down the metal stairs as quietly as possible, but the old fire escape creaked with every step. A shout from above told them they had been spotted. Sarah pushed Jessica ahead of her and drew her weapon just as a figure appeared at the window above them. The man was raising an assault rifle when Sarah put 2 bullets in his chest, sending him tumbling back into the apartment. "Move faster," Sarah urged Jessica, who was now taking the stairs 3 at a time. They reached the alley behind the building just as 2 more men came around the corner from the street. Sarah recognized one of them from the intelligence files, a former Russian Special Forces operator named Dmitry, who had worked with Petrov for years. "Behind the dumpster," Sarah ordered, pushing Jessica toward the only available cover. The firefight was brief but intense. Sarah's training kicked in automatically, and she found herself moving and shooting with the deadly precision that had made her legendary in her CIA days. The muscle memory was still there, even after 15 years of peaceful living. When the shooting stopped, 2 men lay dead in the alley, and Sarah was checking Jessica for injuries while sirens wailed in the distance. "Are you hurt?" Sarah asked, running her hands along Jessica's arms and legs to check for wounds. "I don't think so," Jessica replied, though her voice was shaky. "But Sarah, who were those people? And who are you really?" Before Sarah could answer, Agent Chen arrived with a full Secret Service response team. The next few hours were a blur of debriefings, scene analysis, and heated discussions about what to do next. "The safe house in Virginia has been compromised," Agent Chen reported as they sat in a secure conference room at the FBI's Washington field office. "We found surveillance equipment that had been in place for weeks." Sarah wasn't surprised. Petrov had clearly been planning this operation for months, possibly years. He would have identified and compromised multiple government safe houses. "We need to go off the grid completely," Sarah said. "Somewhere Petrov can't predict, with people he doesn't know about." "Absolutely not," Director Sullivan interjected. "We're not handing over the president's daughter to a rogue operative with no oversight." "I'm not a rogue operative," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm a dead woman trying to keep an innocent person alive. And right now that gives me advantages that your official protocols don't." Jessica, who had been quietly listening to the discussion, finally spoke up. "I want to know who you really are. No more lies, no more half-truths. If I'm trusting you with my life, I deserve to know who I'm trusting." The room fell silent. Sarah looked at Sullivan, who shook his head slightly, then at Agent Chen, who shrugged as if to say the decision was hers. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she said finally. 15 years ago, I was a CIA operative specializing in deep cover operations in hostile territories. I helped build the case that put Viktor Petrov in prison. The man who attacked you today is working for Petrov, who escaped from a Russian prison 6 months ago and has been planning his revenge ever since. Jessica absorbed this information with remarkable calm. "And you're supposed to be dead?" "Officially, yes. It was easier for everyone involved if Sarah Martinez stayed buried. But now Petrov knows you're alive, and he's using me to get to you." "That's correct." Jessica was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. When she spoke again, her voice was steady and determined. "Then we need to turn the tables on him. If he's using me as bait to draw you out, we use that against him. We make him think he's winning until we can get close enough to end this." Sullivan looked alarmed. "Ms. Morrison, with all due respect, this isn't a movie. These are professional killers who have already demonstrated they're willing to murder federal agents to get to you." "I understand that," Jessica replied. "But hiding hasn't worked. Running hasn't worked. Maybe it's time to stop being the prey and start being the hunter." Sarah felt a surge of admiration for the young woman's courage, even as she recognized the danger in that kind of thinking. "It's not that simple," she said. "Petrov has resources, training, and a network of people who want me dead. We can't just walk into his trap and hope for the best." "No," Jessica agreed. "But we can walk into his trap knowing it's a trap and be prepared for it. You said yourself that he's emotional about this, not purely strategic. That means he'll want to see you suffer before he kills you. That gives us time to plan." Agent Chen looked skeptical. "What exactly are you proposing?" Jessica turned to Sarah. "You know him better than anyone else here. If he wants to make you suffer, what would hurt you the most?" Sarah already knew the answer, and it chilled her to the bone. "Watching someone innocent die because of choices I made years ago." "Then that's what he'll try to do," Jessica said. "But if we know that's the plan, we can prepare for it. We can control the circumstances instead of letting him choose them." The plan that began forming in that conference room was dangerous, perhaps even suicidal. But as Sarah looked at Jessica Morrison's determined face, she realized the president's daughter was right about one thing. Hiding and running hadn't worked, and eventually Petrov would corner them in a situation where they had no control at all. It was time to take the initiative, even if it meant walking directly into the arms of her most dangerous enemy. The abandoned warehouse in Baltimore had once housed a shipping company that went bankrupt during the economic recession. Now it served as the perfect location for what Sarah and Jessica were calling their controlled surrender. The building had multiple entry points, good sight lines, and enough structural cover to provide tactical advantages if things went wrong. Sarah spent 2 days preparing the site, placing hidden cameras, emergency equipment, and backup weapons in strategic locations throughout the building. She had also arranged for FBI surveillance teams to monitor from a distance, though she knew that if Petrov was as smart as she remembered, he would detect and neutralize any obvious federal presence. "Are you sure about this?" Agent Chen asked for the dozenth time as they conducted a final walkthrough. "Once you make contact with Petrov, there's no guarantee we can get you out safely." Sarah checked the concealed microphone attached to her jacket. "There are no guarantees in any plan, but at least this way we control the initial setup." Jessica was practicing her role in a separate part of the warehouse. The plan required her to appear genuinely terrified and helpless, which meant suppressing all the courage and intelligence that had gotten them this far. It was perhaps the most difficult acting job imaginable. The message to Petrov had been simple and direct. Sarah had used old communication channels that she knew he would be monitoring, channels that had been dormant since her supposed death 15 years earlier. The message contained coordinates, a time, and a promise. Come alone, and no one else gets hurt. Of course, Sarah knew that Petrov would not come alone, just as he knew that she would not come without backup. The question was, which side would better anticipate the other's preparations? At exactly midnight, Sarah received a call on the encrypted phone she had provided in her message. "Sarah Martinez," came the familiar voice with its heavy Russian accent. "I must admit I had begun to wonder if the reports of your death were true after all." "Hello, Victor," she replied, settling into the metal chair she had positioned in the center of the warehouse's main floor. "Prison seems to have agreed with you. You sound exactly the same." "Prison taught me patience," Petrov replied. 15 years of patience while I planned exactly how I would make you pay for destroying my life." Sarah could hear the hatred in his voice, but also something else that concerned her. There was a calm satisfaction that suggested Petrov believed he had already won. "Your wife's death wasn't my fault, Victor. She was in prison because she chose to help you smuggle weapons to terrorists." "Elena was innocent." Petrov's voice rose, the first crack in his controlled demeanor. "She knew nothing about the business. You could have left her out of it, but you needed every bit of leverage to ensure my conviction." Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the debates she had had with prosecutors about Elena Petrov's involvement. The woman had genuinely seemed unaware of her husband's criminal activities, but the evidence suggested she had at least suspected something. "I'm sorry about Elena," Sarah said, and meant it. "But killing Jessica Morrison won't bring her back." "No," Petrov agreed, his voice returning to its cold calm. But watching you fail to save an innocent person will give me the same satisfaction you felt when you destroyed my family. Through the warehouse windows, Sarah could see vehicle headlights approaching. It was time for the most dangerous part of their plan. I'm here, Victor. Just like I promised. Let's finish this. Indeed, let us finish this. The main warehouse doors burst open, and armed men poured in from multiple entrances. Sarah counted at least 8 operatives, all moving with military precision and all carrying automatic weapons. Petrov himself entered last, older and grayer than in his prison photos, but still carrying himself with the arrogant confidence that had made him such a dangerous criminal. Stand up slowly, he ordered. Hands where I can see them. Sarah complied, keeping her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She needed Petrov to feel completely in control for the next phase of their plan to work. Where is the president's daughter? Petrov asked, his men spreading out to secure the warehouse. Safe, Sarah replied. That was the deal. I come alone, and Jessica stays out of this. Petrov laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth or humor. Did you really think I would be satisfied with just killing you? No, Sarah Martinez. You will watch the girl die, knowing that your arrogance and your need to be a hero led to her death. Then you will join her. On cue, 2 of Petrov's men dragged Jessica into the warehouse. She had done an excellent job of appearing terrified and helpless, her hands bound behind her back and a gag in her mouth. To anyone watching, she looked like a genuine hostage who had been roughly treated. There we are, Petrov said with satisfaction. Now we have everyone we need for this little reunion. Sarah felt genuine fear for the first time since they had begun planning this operation. No matter how well they had prepared, Jessica was now in the hands of professional killers, and any mistake could result in her death. Let her go, Victor. She's not part of this. Oh, but she is part of it now, Petrov replied, walking closer to Sarah. She became part of it the moment you decided to play hero instead of staying dead like you were supposed to. Sarah could see that Petrov's men had positioned themselves throughout the warehouse, taking advantage of the cover she had noted during her reconnaissance. What they didn't realize was that she had also positioned cameras and listening devices that would give the FBI surveillance teams a clear picture of their locations. You know, Petrov continued, I spent many nights in prison imagining this conversation. I wondered if you would beg for her life, or if your legendary professionalism would prevent you from showing weakness even as you watched an innocent person die. What do you want from me? Sarah asked. I want you to feel exactly what I felt when Elena died, Petrov replied. Helpless, guilty, responsible for the death of someone who trusted you to protect them. As Petrov spoke, Sarah noticed that Jessica was working her hands behind her back. The knots binding her wrist had been designed to look secure while actually being relatively easy to escape from, but Jessica would need time and distraction to free herself completely. Elena made her own choices, Sarah said, deliberately provoking Petrov to keep his attention focused on her. Just like you made yours. Just like I made mine. Petrov's face darkened with rage. Elena was a good woman who made the mistake of loving the wrong man, just like this girl made the mistake of trusting the wrong person to protect her. Behind him, Sarah could see Jessica working frantically at her bonds. They had practiced this scenario, but practice was very different from performing under the pressure of real danger. If you're going to kill us anyway, Sarah said, at least tell me how you found us. I'm curious about how long you've been planning this. Petrov smiled, clearly pleased with himself. I have been planning this since the day I was arrested. Every contact, every favor, every piece of information was gathered with this moment in mind. Did you really think disappearing to a small town in Maine would keep you hidden forever? Sarah's blood ran cold. If Petrov had known about her life in Maine, then he had been watching her far longer than anyone had realized. The implications of that level of surveillance and planning suggested resources that went far beyond what they had estimated. Surprised? Petrov asked, noting her expression. You should be. This operation has taken years to organize and cost. More money than most small countries spend on their entire military budgets. But some things are worth any price. Jessica had managed to free one hand and was working on the other. Sarah needed to buy her more time, but she was running out of conversation topics that would hold Petrov's interest. "What happens after you kill us?" Sarah asked. "Do you really think the US government will just forget that you murdered the president's daughter?" "I will be long gone before they even find the bodies," Petrov replied. "And the message will be clear to anyone else who might consider crossing me in the future." The second hand came free, and Jessica began working on the gag. Sarah knew that the next few minutes would determine whether their desperate plan succeeded or resulted in both of their deaths. The moment Jessica freed herself from the gag, everything changed. Instead of calling for help or trying to run, she did exactly what Sarah had trained her to do. She grabbed the concealed smoke grenade that had been hidden beneath the wooden crate where Petrov's men had positioned her and pulled the pin. Thick white smoke began pouring through the warehouse as Sarah dove toward the nearest piece of cover. She had memorized the layout in complete darkness, but Petrov's men had not. The advantage was small, but in situations like this, small advantages could mean the difference between life and death. "Find them!" Petrov shouted through the chaos. They cannot have gone far. Sarah reached the steel support beam where she had hidden her backup weapon. The pistol felt familiar in her hands, like greeting an old friend after a long absence. She could hear Petrov's men moving through the smoke, their military training evident in their coordinated search pattern. A figure emerged from the white haze to her left. Sarah put 2 bullets center mass before the man could bring his rifle to bear. The sound of gunfire echoed through the warehouse, and suddenly everyone was shooting at shadows and sounds. "Jessica!" Sarah called out. "Corner position 3. They had rehearsed this scenario dozens of times. Position 3 was a reinforced concrete pillar near the back of the warehouse where Sarah had pre-positioned additional weapons and ammunition. If Jessica could reach it, she would have both cover and the means to defend herself. "She's moving toward the back," one of Petrov's men shouted in accented English. Sarah fired in the direction of the voice, more to create confusion than with any expectation of hitting her target. The smoke was beginning to thin, which would work against them once Petrov's men could see clearly again. She needed to reduce the odds more quickly. Using the sound of voices and footsteps to guide her, Sarah began working her way around the perimeter of the warehouse. Her 15 years of peaceful living had not erased the predatory instincts that had made her one of the CIA's most effective operatives. If anything, the time away had given her a clarity and calm that she had lacked during her younger, more aggressive years. She found her second target crouched behind a wooden pallet, trying to get a clear line of sight toward where he thought Jessica had gone. Sarah approached from behind and eliminated him with a single shot to the back of the head before moving on. "Report!" Petrov's voice cut through the diminishing smoke. "How many are down?" The silence that followed told Sarah that Petrov was beginning to realize he had underestimated his opponents. 2 of his men were dead, and the others were now dealing with an enemy who knew the terrain better than they did. "Sir," came a nervous voice, "maybe we should withdraw and regroup." "No!" Petrov snarled. "She is one woman and a college student. Find them and finish this." Sarah smiled grimly. Petrov's ego was working against him, just as she had hoped it would. A smart commander would have pulled back and tried a different approach, but Petrov's need for personal revenge was overriding his tactical judgment. The smoke had cleared enough for Sarah to see movement near the main entrance. 3 men were repositioning to cut off any escape routes, while another was advancing toward the back where Jessica should be hiding. Petrov himself remained near the center of the warehouse, using an overturned table as cover while he directed his men. Sarah needed to reach Jessica before Petrov's operative found her hiding place. She moved along the wall using the shadows and remaining wisps of smoke for concealment. Behind her, she could hear someone approaching her previous position. "Movement on the left side," a voice called out. Bullets sparked off the concrete near Sarah's head as she dove behind a stack of old shipping containers. She was pinned down, but at least she had drawn attention away from Jessica's position. "I have her," came a shout from the back of the warehouse. Sarah's blood went cold. Either Jessica had been found, or Petrov's man thought he had found her. Either way, Sarah needed to move fast. She fired 3 quick shots toward the muzzle flashes that had been aimed at her. then sprinted toward the back of the warehouse. Behind her, she heard someone curse in Russian, which suggested at least one of her shots had found its mark. What she found at position 3 surprised her. Jessica was not cowering behind the concrete pillar as planned. Instead, she was lying, prone behind a piece of fallen debris, holding one of the backup weapons Sarah had positioned, and aiming at the approaching operative with steady hands. "Don't move," Jessica was saying in a calm, controlled voice. "Put your weapon down and step back." The man, clearly not expecting resistance from a college student, hesitated just long enough for Sarah to approach from his blind side. Her knife found the space between his ribs before he could decide how to respond to Jessica's command. "Are you hurt?" Sarah asked as the man collapsed. "No," Jessica replied. "But Sarah, look." She pointed toward the center of the warehouse where Petrov was no longer hiding behind his overturned table. Instead, he was standing in the open, holding what appeared to be a remote detonator. "Sarah Martinez!" Petrov called out, his voice echoing through the warehouse. "I know you can hear me. I know you are still alive because my men are dying. But it does not matter now." Sarah felt her stomach drop as she realized what Petrov was holding. During all their planning and preparation, they had never considered that he might have rigged the warehouse with explosives. "You see, I learned something important during my years in prison," Petrov continued. "Sometimes the best revenge is not watching your enemy suffer, but ensuring that everyone knows they failed in the end. The president's daughter dies tonight, and the world will know that the legendary Sarah Martinez could not save her." "He's bluffing," Jessica whispered, but Sarah could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Sarah wasn't so sure. Petrov had demonstrated resources and planning capabilities far beyond what they had anticipated. If he had been watching her for years and had the funding to mount this elaborate operation, explosives were certainly within his reach. "I can see you back there," Petrov called out. "Both of you, come out now, and I will make your deaths quick. Try to run, and I will bring this entire building down on top of you." Sarah quickly calculated their options. The warehouse had multiple exits, but if Petrov had rigged the building with explosives, he could potentially collapse the entire structure before they could escape. On the other hand, if they surrendered, they would certainly die. "What's the range on that detonator?" Jessica asked quietly, showing that her mind was working along the same tactical lines as Sarah's. "Depends on the type," Sarah replied. "Could be anywhere from 50 feet to half a mile. And if we take him down before he can trigger it, then we hope he was bluffing about the explosives, or that he was the only one with a detonator." Jessica nodded grimly. "So we need to get close enough to stop him without giving him time to react." Sarah looked at the young woman beside her and felt a surge of admiration mixed with fear. Jessica had adapted to this nightmare situation with remarkable calm and intelligence, but she was still a college student facing trained killers. The odds were not in their favor. "There's another option," Sarah said quietly. "I go out there, alone. I surrender and try to talk him down while you slip out the back exit. Even if the building is rigged, you might make it far enough away to survive the blast." "Absolutely not," Jessica replied immediately. "We started this together, and we finish it together. Jessica, you don't understand. This isn't about courage or loyalty. This is about mathematics. If one of us has to die to stop Petrov, better it should be the person who's already supposed to be dead." "And you don't understand," Jessica shot back. "I'm not just some helpless victim you need to protect. I knew the risks when I agreed to this plan. I'm not running away now." Before Sarah could argue further, the sound of sirens began echoing in the distance. The FBI surveillance teams had apparently decided that the situation had escalated beyond their monitoring role. "Ah," Petrov called out. "It seems your government friends have decided to join our little party. How unfortunate. Now I have no choice but to end this quickly." Sarah made a decision that went against every instinct she had developed during her years as an operative. Instead of trying to outmaneuver or outfight Petrov, she stood up and walked into the open. "Here I am, Victor," she called out, her hands raised but not quite surrender position. "You wanted Sarah Martinez, you found her." Petrov smiled as she approached, the remote detonator still in his right hand while his left held a pistol aimed at her chest. The legendary ghost returns from the dead, he said. Tell me, Sarah, was it worth it? 15 years of hiding. 15 years of pretending to be someone else? Also, you could die in a Baltimore warehouse trying to save a girl you barely know? Sarah stopped about 20 feet away from Petrov, close enough to see the satisfaction in his eyes, but hopefully far enough away to react if Jessica could create a distraction. Actually, Sarah said, those 15 years were the best of my life. I learned what it was like to live without killing, without constantly looking over my shoulder, without wondering if every person I met might be an enemy. Emma Thompson was happier than Sarah Martinez ever was. How touching, Petrov replied mockingly. And now you get to die knowing that your peaceful little life was all an illusion. Maybe, Sarah agreed. But at least I got to experience it. Elena never got that chance, and neither will you. Petrov's expression darkened. Do not speak of Elena. You have no right to say her name. She would have hated what you became. Victor. The Elena I met during the investigation was a woman who believed in redemption and second chances. She would have wanted you to find peace, not spend 15 years planning revenge. You know nothing about what Elena would have wanted. I know she wouldn't have wanted you to murder an innocent young woman just to hurt me. Sarah could see that her words were having an effect. Petrov was getting angry, which meant he was getting sloppy. His grip on the detonator was tightening, but his attention was focused entirely on her. Behind him, barely visible in the shadows, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement. Jessica was circling around, using the concealment they had practiced to approach Petrov from behind. The plan was dangerous and probably suicidal, but it was their only chance. Sarah needed to keep Petrov talking just a little longer. The next few seconds stretched into eternity. Sarah watched Jessica moving through the shadows, while keeping her own expression neutral, giving no indication that anything was happening behind Petrov. The young woman moved with surprising stealth, her earlier training sessions paying off in the most critical moment imaginable. You want to know what Elena would have wanted? Sarah said, buying Jessica the precious seconds she needed. She would have wanted you to live, Victor, to find someone new to love, to build something positive instead of tearing everything down. Lies, Petrov spat, but Sarah could see doubt creeping into his eyes. Elena loved only me. She would want me to avenge her death. Elena loved you enough to go to prison rather than testify against you, Sarah replied. That kind of love doesn't ask for revenge. It asks for forgiveness. Jessica was almost in position now, close enough to make her move. Sarah tensed, ready to act the moment the young woman made her attempt. Enough. Petrov raised the detonator, his finger poised over the trigger. You will not poison her memory with your... Jessica struck like lightning, grabbing Petrov's wrist and forcing his hand up just as he pressed the detonator. The explosion that followed was not the massive blast that would have brought down the entire warehouse, but a series of smaller charges that had been placed around the building's support columns. Sarah dove forward, tackling Petrov around the waist and driving him to the ground as debris rained down around them. The pistol flew from his hand, skittering across the concrete floor as both women fought to control the man who had spent 15 years planning their deaths. Petrov was older than he had been during his criminal prime, but he was still dangerous and desperate. He threw Jessica off him with a vicious elbow to her ribs, then rolled away from Sarah's grappling attempt. For a moment, all three of them were on their hands and knees, scrambling for weapons or advantage. Sarah reached the pistol first, but Petrov was closer to the knife he had drawn from his belt. Jessica, winded from the blow to her ribs, was trying to get back into the fight when Petrov lunged at Sarah with the blade. Years of muscle memory saved Sarah's life. She twisted away from the knife thrust and brought the pistol up in a defensive position. But Petrov was inside her guard now, too close for her to get a clean shot without risking hitting Jessica. They grappled for control of both weapons, rolling across the debris-strewn floor as the warehouse groaned ominously around them. The explosions had not brought down the building, but they had seriously weakened its structural integrity. Sarah! Jessica called out a warning, just as one of Petrov's surviving operatives appeared through the smoke, his rifle trained on the struggling figures. Without hesitation, Jessica threw herself between the gunman and Sarah, taking the bullets meant for the woman who had risked everything to protect her. She went down hard, blood spreading across her shirt as she hit the concrete. The sight of Jessica falling broke something inside Sarah. All the careful professional detachment she had maintained throughout her career evaporated in an instant. This wasn't about completing a mission or protecting an asset anymore. This was about a brave young woman who had trusted her and was now dying because of that trust. Sarah drove her knee into Petrov's stomach with enough force to break ribs, then brought the pistol down on his skull. He went limp, either unconscious or dead, and Sarah didn't care which. She spun toward the gunman who had shot Jessica and put 3 bullets in his chest before he could fire again. Then she was kneeling beside Jessica, pressing her hands against the wounds to try to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me," Sarah said, applying pressure to the worst of the wounds. "The paramedics are almost here. You're going to be fine." Jessica's eyes were unfocused, but she managed a weak smile. "Did we get him?" Sarah looked over at Petrov's motionless form. "Yeah, we got him." "Good," Jessica whispered. "I was starting to like being a badass spy." The warehouse was filling with smoke from fires started by the explosions, and Sarah could hear voices calling from outside. The FBI had finally moved in, but they might be too late to save Jessica. Sarah made a decision that would have been unthinkable during her CIA days. She activated the emergency beacon she had been carrying, the one that would bring medical helicopters and federal response teams, but would also officially resurrect Sarah Martinez from the dead. Her quiet life as Emma Thompson was over, but if it meant saving Jessica Morrison's life, it was a price she was willing to pay. "Sarah Martinez, this is Agent Chen," came a voice over her radio. "We have medical teams standing by. What's your status?" "2 hostiles down. Primary target neutralized," Sarah replied, using the official language that felt strange after so many years. "But I need a medical evacuation immediately. The president's daughter has been shot and is losing blood fast." As she spoke, Sarah kept pressure on Jessica's wounds while scanning the warehouse for any remaining threats. The building was still structurally unsound, and they needed to get out before it collapsed completely. "Can you move her?" Agent Chen asked. Sarah assessed Jessica's condition. The young woman was conscious but weak, and moving her might make the bleeding worse. On the other hand, staying in a building that could collapse at any moment was definitely worse. "I'm going to carry you out of here," Sarah told Jessica. "It's going to hurt, but we need to get you to the paramedics." Jessica nodded weakly. "Just don't drop me. That would be a really embarrassing way to die after surviving everything else." Sarah lifted Jessica as carefully as possible, supporting her weight while avoiding the worst of the wounds. The young woman bit back a cry of pain but didn't protest as Sarah began moving toward the nearest exit. They made it outside just as the first federal response vehicles arrived. Paramedics immediately took Jessica from Sarah's arms and began working to stabilize her condition. Sarah watched them load her into the ambulance, then looked back at the warehouse where her past had finally caught up with her. Director Sullivan approached as the ambulance pulled away, its sirens wailing through the Baltimore night. "Is she going to make it?" Sarah asked. "The paramedics think so," Sullivan replied. "She's tough and she got medical attention quickly thanks to you." Sarah nodded, feeling suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was wearing off and 15 years of peaceful living seemed to crash down on her all at once. "What happens now?" she asked. Sullivan was quiet for a moment, watching the warehouse burn. "Now Sarah Martinez officially comes back from the dead. There will be debriefings, paperwork, probably a medal ceremony that you won't want to attend, and questions about what you want to do next." Sarah thought about her bookstore in Maine, about the quiet mornings watching the lighthouse beam sweep across the harbor. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now, someone who had never had to kill anyone or watch a brave young woman take bullets meant for her. "I want to visit Jessica in the hospital," she said finally. "After that, I'll figure out what comes next." 3 days later, Sarah sat beside Jessica's hospital bed, reading aloud from a book about lighthouse history that she had brought from her store in Maine. Jessica was recovering well, the doctors said, though she would need several more surgeries and months of physical therapy. You know, Jessica said when Sarah finished the chapter, I've been thinking about what I want to do after college. Oh? I think I might want to work in intelligence. Turns out I'm pretty good at this spy stuff. Sarah laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had in weeks. I think the intelligence community could use someone with your particular combination of courage and common sense. Does that mean you'll put in a good word for me? Sarah considered the question. She still didn't know what her own future held, but she knew that Jessica Morrison would make an excellent intelligence officer if that was the path she chose. I'll do better than that, Sarah said. If you're serious about this, I'll train you, myself. The world needs more people who are willing to risk everything to protect others. Jessica smiled, the first truly happy expression Sarah had seen from her since the warehouse. I'd like that. But first, I want to visit your bookstore in Maine. I hear you have some excellent books about lighthouses. Sarah looked out the hospital window at the bustling city beyond. Somewhere out there, her quiet life was waiting for her, but she was beginning to realize that she might not want it back exactly as it had been. Maybe it was time for Emma Thompson and Sarah Martinez to find a way to coexist, to build something new that honored both the woman who had found peace and the woman who had never stopped fighting to protect others. I think that can be arranged, she said. After all, everyone needs a place where they can truly be themselves.